Chapter 1. The Prisoner of Bodmin. The rain had been falling for 3 days. Not the gentle rain of spring, nor the brief showers that swept in from the Atlantic and vanished again within an hour. This was a November rain, relentless, cold, heavy, the kind that seemed determined to wash the colour from the world. Across Cornwall, lanes had become rivers of mud. Streams overflowed their banks. Stone walls dripped continuously. The moors disappeared beneath low cloud and drifting mist. By night, the landscape seemed almost deserted. Only the wind remained, the wind and the rain. Together they swept across the lonely hills, with a mournful voice that seemed older than the kingdom itself. High above the town of Bodmin stood the county jail. Its grey stone walls rose from the darkness like a fortress. Lanterns burned at the gatehouse. Sentries paced along the perimeter. Iron bars guarded every window. The prison had been built to hold thieves, smugglers, murderers, and debtors. Yet in one isolated cell sat a prisoner unlike any the jail had ever known. Vice-admiral Henri de Villeneuve of the French Navy sat awake beside a small lantern. Sleep had become difficult, not because of the conditions. After years at sea, he had endured far worse. No, sleep was difficult because he could no longer bear the uncertainty. Outside his narrow window, rain rattled against the stone. Inside, silence filled the chamber. The admiral stared at a crude map scratched into the wall beside his bed. France, the Channel, the Bay of Biscay, the Atlantic coast. He had drawn it from memory during his months of captivity. A sailor always needed a chart, even if it led nowhere. At 60 years of age, Villeneuve carried himself with remarkable dignity despite his circumstances. His dark naval coat had long since faded. Grey touched his hair. The years had lined his face, yet his eyes remained sharp, intelligent, watchful. The eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime studying weather, ships, and enemies. Unfortunately, none of those skills proved useful inside a prison. A distant church bell echoed through the rain. Midnight. Another day gone. Another day imprisoned. The admiral rose and crossed to the window. Beyond the bars, Bodmin slept beneath darkness. A few lanterns glowed faintly among the houses below. Otherwise, there was nothing. Only rain and mist, and the endless blackness of a Cornish night. A knock sounded suddenly at the door. Villeneuve turned. The sound surprised him. Visitors were uncommon at this hour. The lock rattled. A key turned. The door opened. A guard entered carrying a lantern. Behind him came another man, the governor, Mr. Samuel Trelawney, a tall gentleman in his 50s with silver hair and a permanently worried expression. The governor disliked surprises. Unfortunately, prison life provided them frequently. Admiral. Villeneuve inclined his head politely. Governor. Trelawney stepped inside. The guard remained by the door. For several moments, neither man spoke. The governor appeared uncomfortable. Eventually, he cleared his throat. I thought you should know. Villeneuve raised an eyebrow. Know what? The governor hesitated, then answered quietly. A French vessel was reported yesterday. The admiral's expression remained calm, yet his pulse quickened. A French vessel? Possibly. Where? Off the north coast. Silence followed. The governor immediately regretted mentioning it. The admiral could see it plainly, yet the information could not be withdrawn now. A warship? Trelawney shook his head. No. Then what? A small frigate, perhaps. Villeneuve turned back toward the window. His face revealed nothing. His thoughts, however, raced. A frigate, off Cornwall, during wartime. There were many explanations. Most were innocent. One possibility was not. The governor seemed eager to change the subject. Weather is dreadful. Villeneuve almost smiled. An Englishman discussing weather. Some habits truly were universal. Indeed. Trelawney shifted awkwardly, then nodded toward the guard. The man stepped forward. Good night, Admiral. Good night, Governor. The visitors departed. The lock turned once more. Footsteps faded down the corridor. The Admiral stood alone again. Yet the room no longer felt quite so empty. A frigate. The thought lingered. A small frigate. The sort of vessel often used for reconnaissance, or communication, or missions requiring secrecy. Outside, thunder rolled across the moors. The rain intensified. Villeneuve returned slowly to his chair. Then he laughed quietly to himself. The sound surprised even him. How easily hope returns. A single rumour, a single ship, and already the imagination begins building castles, or rescue plans, or miracles. The Admiral shook his head. Such thoughts were dangerous. Months of imprisonment had taught him that. Hope, when disappointed often enough, becomes painful. Still, the possibility remained, and possibilities were difficult to ignore. Far away, beyond the prison walls, beyond Bodmin, beyond the rain-soaked hills, the sea crashed against the Cornish coast. Along those shores stood fishing villages battered by wind and weather. One such village lay hidden beneath towering cliffs several miles north of the town. The harbour was small, the cottages older than memory. Most of its inhabitants had long since retired for the night. Not all. A fisherman named Thomas Penhaligon remained awake. His cottage overlooked the sea. The storm had disturbed his sleep. That alone was unusual. Cornish fishermen generally slept through weather capable of frightening lesser men. Yet something felt different tonight. Penhaligon stood by his window, watching, listening. The sea appeared almost black beneath the storm clouds. Waves exploded against distant rocks. Spray rose into the darkness. Then suddenly he saw it. A light, far offshore, very faint, almost invisible. The fisherman narrowed his eyes. Another light appeared, then vanished. Lanterns, ship lanterns. His expression changed. No vessel should have been sailing so close to the coast in weather like this. Not willingly. The lights appeared again, moving slowly, carefully. The ship seemed to be approaching. Penhaligon watched for several minutes. Then he crossed himself, not because he feared ghosts, but because sailors respected bad weather, and only desperate men sailed willingly into storms. Far offshore, hidden within rain and darkness, a small frigate battled the sea. She was called La Tempête, the storm. Never had a vessel carried a more appropriate name. The frigate rose and fell violently among the waves. Her deck glistened with sea water. Her rigging groaned. Her sails strained against the wind. Yet still she pressed onward. The captain stood upon the quarterdeck. Rain streamed from his coat. His hands gripped the rail. The cliffs of Cornwall loomed ahead, dark shapes emerging through mist. At last one of the officers approached. "Captain." The man turned. Well, we found the cove. For the first time all evening, the captain smiled. Excellent. The officer lowered his voice. The men are ready. The captain looked toward the shore, toward England, toward Bodmin, toward the prison hidden beyond the hills. A dangerous mission awaited them, one from which many might never return. Yet none had volunteered reluctantly, because the prisoner they sought was no ordinary officer. He was a hero, a symbol, a leader, and France wanted him home. The captain drew a pocket watch from inside his coat. The silver case reflected lantern light briefly, then snapped shut. Signal the landing party. The officer nodded. Moments later, movement spread across the frigate. Sailors lowered boats. Marines checked muskets. Officers reviewed maps one final time. Everything had been prepared months in advance. The intelligence, the route, the disguises, the extraction plan. Success remained uncertain, but preparation was complete. The captain watched the coastline grow clearer. Then he looked toward the darkness inland. Somewhere beyond those hills sat a French admiral, a man who had no idea that rescue was coming. Not yet. The captain smiled slightly. Then he spoke the words every man aboard had waited months to hear. Begin the operation. The boats descended into the sea. The storm continued, the rain continued, the wind continued, and somewhere high above Bodmin, inside a lonely prison cell, Vice-Admiral Henri de Villeneuve sat staring at the rain upon the window, listening to the storm, thinking about a mysterious frigate, and wondering whether fate had finally remembered him. He could not know it, could not even imagine it, but at that very moment, a rescue force was already crossing the black waters toward England, and by the time the next night arrived, everything would change. Rain swept across the Cornish coast in great grey sheets, driven by a wind that seemed determined to tear itself apart against the cliffs. Waves crashed against the rocks below with such force that entire curtains of white spray rose into the darkness. Few men would willingly approach the shoreline on a night like this. That was precisely why Captain Luc Moreau had chosen it. Standing in the bow of the lead boat, he watched the black outline of the cliffs emerge through rain and mist. Water streamed from his hat and cloak. His hands gripped the gunwale tightly as the small craft rose and plunged among the waves. Behind him sat 8 men, French Marines, veterans all, carefully selected, disciplined, trusted. Not one had asked why they had been chosen. Not one had refused. Each knew the mission. Reach Bodmin. Locate Vice-Admiral Henri de Villeneuve. Extract him. Return him safely to France. Simple in theory, almost impossible in practice. The boat rose suddenly upon a wave, then dropped sharply. One of the Marines crossed himself. Another tightened his grip upon a waterproof bundle containing maps and forged papers. Ahead, the cliffs grew larger. The cove appeared at last, a narrow opening between dark walls of rock, easy to miss, perfect for their purposes. Moreau pointed. There. The boatman nodded. The oarsman adjusted course. A second boat followed close behind, then a third. Together they slipped through the entrance. Immediately the sea calmed, not completely, but enough. The towering cliffs sheltered the small inlet from the worst of the storm. The boats glided toward a narrow strip of shingle. No lights appeared, no voices, no movement, only darkness. The captain stepped into icy water and waded ashore. The Marines followed. Within minutes the landing was complete. 12 men stood upon English soil. The boats immediately pushed away. The frigate could not risk remaining near shore. If British patrol vessels appeared, the entire mission would be compromised. Captain Moreau watched the boats disappear into darkness. Then he turned inland. A steep path climbed between the cliffs. Beyond it lay Cornwall. Beyond Cornwall lay Bodmin. And beyond Bodmin lay the admiral. "Move." The command was barely above a whisper. The men obeyed instantly. The climb proved difficult. Rain had transformed the path into a river of mud. Rocks shifted beneath their boots. Water flowed constantly down the slope. Yet they pressed onward. Eventually, they reached the cliff top. The view might have been magnificent on a clear day. Tonight it revealed almost nothing. The moor stretched away beneath cloud and mist, dark, empty, endless. Somewhere far beyond the horizon lay Bodmin. Captain Moreau unfolded a map. Lantern light was impossible. Instead, he sheltered a tiny hooded lamp beneath his cloak and studied the route. The journey would take most of the following day, perhaps longer. The weather complicated everything. Roads became mud, streams became rivers, visibility became poor. Still, there were advantages. Few people travelled during storms, few patrols ventured onto the moors, and footprints vanished quickly beneath rain. The captain smiled slightly. Nature seemed willing to assist. The men moved out. For the remainder of the night they crossed lonely countryside. Small farms appeared occasionally through the darkness. Ancient stone cottages, silent churches, fields divided by walls older than memory. They avoided them all. A rescue mission survives through invisibility. Every person encountered creates risk. Every conversation creates danger. By dawn they had reached higher ground. The rain finally weakened. Mist replaced it. Great rolling banks of grey drifted across the landscape. The world seemed reduced to 50 yards in every direction. Perfect conditions for hiding. Terrible conditions for navigation. Several times the party stopped to confirm bearings. Moreau trusted his map. He trusted his compass. He trusted his training. Yet Cornwall seemed determined to confuse strangers. Paths appeared and vanished. Hills emerged unexpectedly from the fog. Entire valleys remained invisible until one stood upon their edge. At mid-morning, the group halted among a cluster of abandoned mine workings. The ruins rose from the mist like ghosts. Broken engine houses, collapsed stone walls, rusting machinery. The remains of Cornwall's mining age. No one spoke much. The men ate cold rations, checked equipment, rested aching legs, then continued. Around noon, they encountered their first danger, a rider. The warning came from Sergeant Armand Delacroix, the oldest Marine in the party. He raised a hand. Everyone froze. The sound reached them seconds later. Hoofbeats. Approaching. Moreau immediately pointed toward a nearby stone wall. The men disappeared behind it. Moments later, a horse emerged from the fog. Upon its back rode a British constable. The officer appeared utterly miserable. Rain dripped from his hat. Mud covered his boots. His horse seemed almost as unhappy as its rider. The constable passed within 30 yards of the hidden Frenchman. Had he looked left, he would have seen them immediately. Instead, he continued along the track and vanished into the mist. Only when the hoofbeats disappeared entirely did anyone move. Moreau exhaled slowly. One patrol. Not unexpected, but a useful reminder. They were deep inside enemy territory now. One mistake could end everything. By late afternoon, they reached a small farmhouse. Not by accident. The location had been chosen months earlier. French intelligence maintained occasional contacts throughout Britain. Smugglers, merchants, men willing to exchange loyalty for profit. The farmhouse belonged to one such individual, an elderly fisherman named Elias Trevenna. The man opened the door cautiously, then relaxed when Moreau spoke the agreed phrase. "The sea is rough tonight." Trevenna nodded. "But the fish are hungry." The code remained unchanged. The door opened fully. The Frenchman entered. The farmhouse smelled wonderfully of wood smoke and stew. Several Marines visibly brightened. After days at sea and hours upon the moor, the sight of a warm fire bordered upon miraculous. Trevenna proved surprisingly well informed. He spread a local map upon the table, then tapped a point near Bodmin. "The jail." Moreau leaned forward. "What about it?" The old fisherman lowered his voice. "More guards than usual." The captain frowned. "How many?" "Hard to say." "Why?" Trevenna shrugged. "Some important prisoner, they say." The room grew quiet. The fisherman continued. "People talk." "What sort of talk?" "French admiral." No one spoke. Confirmation. At last, the intelligence had been correct. Villeneuve remained in Bodmin, still alive, still imprisoned, still waiting. The old fisherman tapped another location. "This is more interesting." Moreau studied the map. A road, running east of the prison. "What is it?" "Tomorrow." The fisherman looked around the room, making certain everyone understood the importance of his next words. "Tomorrow morning, the admiral is being moved." Silence followed. The information struck like cannon fire. Moreau stared at the map. Moved where? Nobody knows. The captain's expression hardened. The timetable had changed. Suddenly, everything had changed. The original plan depended upon the admiral remaining in Bodmin Jail. A transfer complicated matters enormously, perhaps fatally. One of the Marines spoke. "When?" "At first light." Moreau's jaw tightened. Less than 12 hours. The rescue mission had arrived only just in time. Or perhaps already too late. Outside, the wind rose once more. Rain tapped against the windows. The old farmhouse seemed very small, very isolated, very far from France. The captain stared at the map, then at the prison marked upon it, then at the road where the transfer would occur. A new plan began forming immediately, riskier, more dangerous, but perhaps more achievable. Slowly, he folded the map, then looked around the room. Every man present understood. The mission had changed. Tomorrow, they would not be rescuing a prisoner from a jail. They would be intercepting him during transport. And somewhere inside Bodmin Jail, Vice Admiral Henri de Villeneuve sat unaware of the race unfolding around him. He did not know rescue lay only miles away. He did not know French soldiers had crossed the sea for him. He did not know that by this time tomorrow he would either be free or lost forever. The storm continued through the night, and in the lonely farmhouse upon the moor, 12 Frenchmen prepared for the most dangerous day of their lives. Captain Luc Moreau slept for less than 2 hours. The same was true for most of the men. The farmhouse was warm. The food had been excellent. The storm outside had eased slightly. Yet none of those comforts could quiet the knowledge that time was running out. The admiral was being moved. Everything now depended upon reaching the road before the British escort. Failure would mean watching their mission disappear into the darkness. Success would require precision and luck. A great deal of luck. The rain had finally stopped when Moreau stepped outside shortly before dawn. The sky remained hidden beneath low cloud. Mist drifted across the moor in long grey ribbons. The landscape seemed suspended between night and morning, silent, ancient, watching. He pulled his coat tighter and studied the horizon. Somewhere beyond the rolling hills lay Bodmin. And somewhere within the prison walls, Henri de Villeneuve was likely preparing for another miserable day of captivity, completely unaware that 12 Frenchmen had crossed an ocean to rescue him. The thought strengthened his resolve. Behind him, the door opened. Sergeant Delacroix emerged carrying 2 muskets. Coffee. Moreau accepted the tin cup. Thank you. The old marine looked toward the mist-covered moor. You ever been to Cornwall before? No. What do you think? Moreau considered the question. The landscape possessed a strange beauty. Wild, lonely, timeless. The sort of place where stories seem to linger. Beautiful, he said finally. Delacroix nodded. Beautiful places are often dangerous. The captain smiled. A soldier's philosophy, a survivor's philosophy. The others emerged gradually. Equipment was checked, weapons inspected, plans reviewed one final time. At first light they departed. The route followed a series of narrow tracks crossing the moor. No roads, no villages, no unnecessary risks. Mist concealed them from view. It also concealed everything else. More than once they nearly lost the path entirely. Ancient stone markers appeared suddenly through the fog. Ruined cottages emerged from nowhere. Dark pools of water reflected the grey sky like polished glass. The moor seemed alive with illusions, a place where distance and direction became uncertain. Around mid-morning, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley leading toward Bodmin. At last, the prison became visible. Even from miles away it looked imposing. Grey walls, square towers, iron gates, a fortress rising from the landscape. Moreau studied it through a small telescope. Guards moved along the perimeter. Smoke rose from chimneys. The prison appeared peaceful, ordinary. Yet somewhere inside sat the man they had crossed the sea to rescue. The captain lowered the telescope. "Any movement?" Delacroix asked. "Not yet." They waited. Minutes passed, then half an hour, then more. Nobody complained. Patience was a soldier's greatest weapon. Eventually, one of the younger Marines pointed. "There." Moreau immediately raised the telescope. The main gate stood open. A horse-drawn carriage emerged. 2 mounted constables rode ahead. 4 more followed behind. The carriage itself was enclosed, heavy, secure, designed specifically to transport prisoners. The captain's pulse quickened. "That's him." The convoy moved slowly along the road, heading east, exactly as the fisherman had predicted. Moreau tracked it through the telescope. The route wound across open countryside before disappearing between 2 wooded hills. A difficult road, narrow, isolated, perfect. The captain smiled. For the first time since landing in England, fortune seemed to favour them. "We move." The Frenchmen descended the ridge immediately. The race had begun. They reached the road shortly after noon. The location chosen for the interception lay between 2 steep embankments where the track narrowed considerably. Thick woodland bordered both sides, a perfect ambush point. The Marines concealed themselves among the trees, branches, bracken, stone walls. Every available piece of cover was utilized. Within minutes, the road appeared deserted once more. Only Moreau and Delacroix remained near the edge, watching, waiting. The hours crawled by. Clouds drifted overhead. The air grew colder. A raven landed nearby and regarded the hidden soldiers suspiciously. Nobody moved. At last, sometime during the afternoon, the sound arrived. Hoofbeats, distant, faint, then gradually louder. The convoy approached. Moreau peered through the trees. The lead riders appeared first. 2 constables, exactly as expected. They looked bored, cold, entirely unaware of the danger surrounding them. The carriage followed, then the rear escort, everything precisely according to the intelligence. The captain waited. The convoy entered the narrow section of road. 10 yards, 5, now. A shrill whistle shattered the silence. Instantly, the Frenchmen emerged from concealment. Muskets levelled, voices shouting. The lead horses reared in alarm. One constable nearly fell from the saddle. The road erupted into confusion. Stop! Moreau's command echoed through the trees. The British escort froze. The odds were obvious. 12 armed men against 6. Resistance would be foolish. One of the constables reached toward his pistol. Delacroix immediately aimed his musket. The warning proved sufficient. The hand withdrew. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Moreau stepped toward the carriage. Rainwater dripped from the trees. Horses snorted nervously. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The captain reached the carriage door, opened it, and looked inside. Vice-Admiral Henri de Villeneuve stared back at him. The old admiral appeared more surprised than frightened. For several moments neither man spoke. Then Moreau removed his hat and smiled. Good afternoon, Admiral. Villeneuve blinked. You are French? Yes. The Admiral looked around the road. The soldiers, the horses, the captured escort, the hidden muskets. Slowly understanding dawned. A remarkable expression crossed his face. Disbelief, followed immediately by hope. Then finally, amusement. Either I have become delirious, he said, or France has sent someone to fetch me. Moreau's smile widened. France requests your company, Admiral. Villeneuve laughed. A deep, genuine laugh, perhaps the first he had enjoyed in many months. Then he climbed down from the carriage, and for the first time since his capture, stood once more among fellow Frenchmen. The rescue had succeeded, at least the first part. Unfortunately, the difficult part still remained, because escaping Bodmin was one thing, escaping England was quite another. And already, far behind them, alarm bells were beginning to ring. The prison would soon discover its prisoner had vanished. The authorities would soon realize what had happened. Roads would close. Patrols would spread across Cornwall. Every mile would become more dangerous. Moreau knew it. Delacroix knew it. The Admiral knew it. The old sailor looked toward the western horizon, toward the sea, toward home, then back at the captain. What now? Moreau glanced toward the darkening sky. Night was approaching, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, hidden upon the Atlantic, a frigate waited. We ride for the coast. The Frenchman mounted the captured horses. The Admiral accepted one with surprising ease for a man who had spent months imprisoned. Within minutes the group was moving. southwest, toward the sea, toward the waiting ship, toward freedom. Behind them, abandoned in the road, the empty carriage rocked gently in the wind, a silent witness to the most audacious rescue Cornwall had ever seen. And as the convoy disappeared into the gathering evening mists, the hunt began. Chapter 4. The Long Ride to the Sea. The rain returned shortly after sunset. Not the violent storm that had battered Cornwall the previous night, but a cold, steady rain that drifted across the countryside and turned every road into mud. Captain Luc Moreau did not mind. Rain concealed movement. Rain discouraged pursuit. Rain made life miserable for everyone involved, including the British. The rescued party rode westward through the gathering darkness. Vice-Admiral Henri de Villeneuve travelled near the centre of the group, wrapped in a borrowed military cloak. Though months of imprisonment had weakened him somewhat, he remained remarkably resilient. Years at sea had hardened him. Naval officers learned quickly that discomfort was often unavoidable. The old admiral seemed almost cheerful. Several times Moreau caught him studying the landscape with quiet appreciation. Eventually, the captain rode alongside him. "You appear in good spirits." Villeneuve smiled. "I have spent 8 months looking at stone walls." He gestured toward the rolling countryside. "At the moment, even rain feels magnificent." Moreau laughed softly. The admiral's mood was understandable. Freedom transformed one's perspective. Mud became adventure. Cold became invigorating. Rain became beautiful, at least temporarily. The column pressed onward. The route followed narrow Cornish lanes winding between ancient stone walls. Most were barely wide enough for 2 horses to pass. Trees leaned overhead, their bare branches swaying in the wind. Darkness arrived fully. Lanterns could not be risked. Instead, they travelled beneath cloud-covered skies, guided by memory, maps, and instinct. The pace remained steady, not fast, not slow. The horses needed conserving. The coast remained many miles away. Around midnight, they reached a crossroads. There, Moreau called a halt. The men gathered beneath a cluster of windswept trees. Delacroix produced the map. The captain studied it carefully. The direct road. He pointed west. Too dangerous now. The sergeant nodded. The admiral leaned closer. "They'll expect us to head straight for the coast." "Exactly." Villeneuve smiled. "Then perhaps we should disappoint them." Moreau folded the map. "A longer route." "How much longer?" 3 hours. The admiral shrugged. "After 8 months in prison, 3 hours seems manageable." The decision made, they turned south. It proved wise. Barely 40 minutes later, they heard horses approaching from the western road. The rescue party immediately left the lane and concealed themselves within a small wooded valley. Moments later, a patrol rode past. British dragoons, 8 of them. Their lanterns glowed through the darkness like wandering stars. The soldiers looked cold, tired, determined. One officer carried a folded paper, most likely Villeneuve's description. The patrol continued westward, unaware that their quarry sat less than 100 yards away. Only after the sound of hoofbeats vanished completely did the French emerge. The hunt was tightening. That much was obvious now. The prison authorities had reacted quickly, perhaps faster than expected. The rescue party continued south. The rain intensified. Streams overflowed their banks. Roads became rivers of mud. More than once the horses nearly lost their footing. The journey grew slower, more difficult, more dangerous. Then disaster nearly struck. Shortly before dawn, they reached a stone bridge crossing a fast-moving river. The crossing appeared straightforward, at first. The lead riders entered safely. Then one of the horses slipped. The animal lost its footing upon the rain-soaked stone. It crashed sideways against the parapet. The rider tumbled heavily. For one horrifying moment it seemed horse and man might plunge into the floodwaters below. Delacroix reacted instantly. He threw himself from his saddle and seized the animal's bridle. Others rushed forward. Together they hauled horse and rider back from the edge. The incident lasted seconds, yet it left everyone shaken. The river below churned violently. Any man swept into it would likely be lost. The rescue mission continued, but now with greater caution. As dawn approached, the weather finally began to improve. The rain weakened. The clouds lifted slightly. Grey morning light spread across the landscape. Ahead, distant hills emerged from the mist, and beyond those hills lay the sea. The sight lifted spirits immediately. The coast meant hope. The coast meant escape. The coast meant la tempête. For the first time, Villeneuve allowed himself to imagine success. France, home, the familiar ports, the navy, the tricolour flying once more above a French vessel. The thought felt almost unreal. Then came another problem. The village. No map had mentioned it. No intelligence report had referenced it. Yet there it stood, a small settlement directly astride their planned route. 20 cottages, perhaps, a church, an inn, a blacksmith, and several dozen potential witnesses. Moreau studied it grimly. They could not ride through openly. Not now, not after the alarm. The villagers might be loyal, or curious, or frightened. Any of those could prove disastrous. The captain surveyed the surrounding terrain, stone walls, fields, hedgerows. Then he smiled. We go around. The detour cost another hour. No one complained. Avoiding people was almost always preferable to meeting them. By midday, they reached higher ground. The sea appeared suddenly, a vast sheet of grey stretching to the horizon. Even Villeneuve stopped his horse to admire it. For a sailor, the sight held profound meaning. The ocean represented home, freedom, purpose, life itself. The old admiral removed his hat briefly, almost as though greeting an old friend. Then Delacroix pointed. Movement, far behind them. Riders, a lot of riders. The rescue party turned immediately. Even at this distance, the threat was obvious. British cavalry, perhaps 20 men, perhaps more. The search had finally found their trail. The race entered its final stage. How long? Villeneuve asked. Moreau studied the distance. 3 hours to the cove. And them. Perhaps 4. The admiral considered this. Then we still lead. For now. The French spurred their horses onward. The pace increased immediately. No longer cautious. No longer conservative. Every minute mattered. The road descended toward the coast. The sea grew larger, the wind stronger. The smell of salt filled the air. Behind them, the riders continued, slowly, relentlessly, closing the distance, hour by hour, mile by mile. By late afternoon, the rescue party reached the cliffs. Towering walls of rock rose above the Atlantic. Below, waves crashed against hidden coves. Spray exploded upward. Gulls wheeled through the wind. Somewhere among those cliffs lay the extraction point. Somewhere offshore waited, La Tempête. Yet the British cavalry remained behind them, closer now, far closer. The final stage had begun. Moreau looked toward the dark horizon, then toward the admiral, then toward the distant riders. The mission was almost complete. Almost. But as every experienced soldier knew, the final mile was often the most dangerous. And before this day ended, they would all discover just how true that was. Chapter 5. The Black Frigate. The sea was waiting. Captain Luc Moreau could smell it long before he reached the cove. Salt, kelp, spray. The ancient scent of the Atlantic carried inland upon the strengthening wind. Ahead, the cliffs descended steeply toward the coast. Beyond them lay a hidden inlet, known only to a handful of fishermen, smugglers, and sailors. And somewhere offshore, concealed beneath gathering dusk, waited La Tempête. The mission was almost complete. Almost. That single word lingered in Moreau's mind like a warning. Behind them, the British cavalry continued its relentless pursuit. The riders had not gained much ground during the afternoon, but they had not fallen behind either. They remained visible upon distant ridges, dark figures against the fading sky, patient, determined, growing steadily closer. The rescue party pressed onward. The horses were tiring now. Foam flecked their mouths. Their breathing had become labored. Hours of hard riding through mud and rain had taken their toll. The men were no better. Exhaustion sat heavily upon every face. Yet nobody suggested slowing. Nobody suggested stopping. France lay somewhere beyond the horizon. That was enough. The track narrowed as they approached the coast. Stone walls gave way to rough grassland and exposed rock. The wind strengthened considerably. Far below, waves exploded against the cliffs. White spray drifted upward like smoke. Villeneuve rode beside Moreau. For several minutes neither man spoke. Then the admiral broke the silence. "You planned this well." The captain smiled faintly. "We are not home yet." "No." Villeneuve looked toward the sea. "But we are closer than I ever expected to be." The old sailor's voice carried quiet emotion. Moreau understood. Months earlier, the admiral had likely accepted that his captivity might last until the war ended, perhaps longer. Now he could smell the sea, hear it, almost touch it. Freedom had become tangible once more. A shout interrupted the moment. One of the Marines pointed behind them. The cavalry had appeared again, much closer this time. Close enough for uniforms to be distinguished, close enough to see sunlight reflecting from sabres. The British had finally found the correct route, and they were moving quickly. Moreau studied the distance, 2 miles perhaps, maybe less. The captain turned his horse. Faster. The group surged forward. The final descent toward the cove began. The path twisted between towering rocks, steep, narrow, dangerous. The sea appeared repeatedly through gaps in the cliffs. Each glimpse seemed to strengthen the men's resolve. Below them, hidden from view, lay the extraction point. The path eventually ended upon a rocky ledge overlooking the inlet. Every man stopped. The sight below was magnificent. The cove lay sheltered between towering cliffs. Dark water churned beneath the evening sky, and beyond the entrance, partially concealed by mist and distance, floated a frigate. La Tempête. For a moment nobody spoke. The ship seemed almost unreal, a dream given form. Home. The tricolour fluttered faintly from her stern. The admiral stared at it. then removed his hat. A smile crossed his face, the first completely unguarded smile Moreau had seen. France had come for him, and France had found him. But the danger was not over, not yet. Delacroix moved to the cliff edge, scanning the approach. Then his expression darkened. They're coming. The cavalry had reached the upper ridges. The riders appeared clearly now, at least 20, perhaps more. The race had become visible to both sides. The British saw the cove. They saw the French. And most importantly, they saw the frigate. Everything became urgent. Moreau immediately began issuing orders. The horses would be abandoned. The men would descend on foot. Signal lanterns would alert the frigate. Boats would be launched. The operation moved quickly. Every man understood what was required. Every second mattered. A lantern flashed from the cliffs. Moments later, another answered from the frigate. Then movement erupted aboard the vessel. Boats were lowered. Sailors rushed across the deck. The extraction had begun. The French party started down the final path. It wound steeply toward the shore below. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots. The wind howled around them. The sea thundered against the rocks. Halfway down, a musket shot echoed across the cliffs. Then another. The British had arrived. The ball struck rock far above the Frenchmen. No one returned fire. The objective was escape, not battle. The descent continued. Faster now, risking injury, risking everything. At last, the shore appeared. A narrow strip of shingle enclosed by cliffs. Dark waves rolled into the cove. 3 boats were already approaching. French sailors bent to their oars with desperate determination. The nearest boat reached shore first. Its bow grounded upon the stones. The sailors jumped into the surf. Quickly. The Marines rushed forward, Villeneuve among them. One by one they climbed aboard. The British riders appeared atop the cliffs, tiny silhouettes against the darkening sky. Several dismounted. More muskets fired. The shots splashed harmlessly into the water. The range remained too great. The boats pushed away. Oars bit into the sea. The distance from shore slowly increased. The British could only watch. The rescue party sat in exhausted silence. No cheering, no celebration. Not yet. The frigate remained ahead. Close. Yet not close enough. Then the weather intervened once more. A squall swept in from the Atlantic. Rain returned suddenly, violently. Wind whipped across the cove. The boats rose and fell sharply. Several Marines grabbed the gunwales. One sailor swore loudly as an oar nearly slipped free. For several tense minutes, it seemed the sea itself might succeed where the British had failed. Yet La Tempête had been built for rough weather. Her sailors knew these waters, slowly, steadily. The boats closed the remaining distance. The frigate towered above them now. Lanterns glowed along her side. French voices echoed across the water. Lines were thrown, ladders lowered. The first boat arrived, then the second, then the third. Moreau climbed aboard near the end. The deck felt wonderfully solid beneath his feet. He immediately turned, searching. The admiral stood near the rail. Rain streamed from his coat. His face was pale with exhaustion. Yet his eyes shone. The captain approached. "Welcome aboard, Admiral." Villeneuve looked across the dark sea, toward the disappearing coastline, toward England, toward the cliffs where British soldiers still watched helplessly. Then he looked up at the tricolour snapping proudly in the wind. For several moments he said nothing. Finally he spoke. I had forgotten how beautiful a French deck feels beneath one's feet. Moreau laughed. Nearby, sailors raised the boats. The anchor came up. Orders rang across the ship. Sails unfurled. The frigate began turning westward, homeward. The cliffs slowly faded into darkness. The British became indistinct shadows, then vanished entirely. The mission was complete. For the first time in nearly a year, Henri de Villeneuve was free. Night settled fully over the Atlantic. The storm gradually weakened. Clouds broke apart. Stars appeared one by one above the sea. The frigate sailed onward beneath them. France awaited. Home awaited. And somewhere behind them, across a dark stretch of ocean, Cornwall disappeared into the night. Vice-Admiral Villeneuve stood alone at the stern for a long time, watching the wake stretching endlessly behind the ship, thinking of prisons, thinking of storms, thinking of the remarkable men who had crossed an ocean to rescue him. At last he removed his hat and offered a silent salute to the fading coastline. Then he turned toward the west, toward France, toward home. And as La Tempête sailed into the darkness, carrying her precious passengers safely across the sea, the Atlantic slowly swallowed the last traces of England. The end.